Key to the Inside, a podcast by Corey Johnson-Levitt. By interviewing leaders from all branches of government, our podcast will provide insight and an up-close perspective into state and national government.
All right, welcome to the KJL podcast. You have partner Andy Levitt and partner Ron Corey here with State Budget Director Dave Massaron and Deputy Director Bethany Wixall. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, it is, I think, a great opportunity. What we're trying to do is give folks a feel for what folks making the decisions are a little bit like, both personally and then how they are using their skills to kind of shape the work they're doing. So I will start, Dave, with maybe a couple of, just to let folks get a better understanding of who the real Dave Massaron is. I'll say the one thing that I learned about Dave a few months ago that surprised me was that he is a hobbyist woodworker, building some tables, some picture frames, and also surprised me he takes his safety of the woodworking shop quite seriously by having a what is the table saw blade that has the saw stop on his table saw blade was the deal he made with his wife. So Dave, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then kind of maybe a fun question would be, if you had 8 hours without your cell phone, so no one could interrupt you and you could do whatever you want, how would you like to spend your day?
Well, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. You're right. I do enjoy woodworking. I'm glad my wife insisted I get the saw stop, because as I told you a few months ago, when I'm working hard, I have a tendency to not sleep as well as maybe I'd like, and I do projects at night, and I managed to not pay attention and run my hand across the top of the table saw, and it worked perfectly. I didn't even get cut. Whereas had I had a traditional one, I might be missing some fingers. So a little bit about me. I obviously came to the state by way of the city, where I was the CFO there. Very different budget challenges, but similar set of priorities from a policy standpoint. And, you know, a father of 2 young boys, Detroit resident, born and bred here. If I had 8 hours, what would I do? I think that the politically correct thing to say is spend it with my kids, but the pandemic has meant that
I will take them out of the equation. You will get another 8 hours to have a great family day. This is Dave.
Okay. This is just Dave. That's good, because I was saying in the pandemic, I'm not sure I would spend those 8 hours with my 2 sons. You know, I think I'd probably break the day into 2 parts. You know, something outside, depending on the season, whether, you know, it could be hunting, biking, boating, something where I get to just be outside and enjoy the day. And then a period where I could do something quiet, like, you know, work in my wood shop or read. One of those 2 things where I could just kind of decompress. Because as everyone knows, the pandemic has given us a lot less time to be quietly reflective as we maybe once had the opportunity, especially those of us with young kids.
Yeah, for sure. And so the other thing we had, our first guest was DHHS Director Elizabeth Hertel. And we are going to have Curtis, because I feel like we might just, but I'm going to ask you who else was in the wedding party should we add to the podcast list. We're just going to try and get the entire wedding party together at this point. So Dave, I think Curtis was your best man. I don't know, how did you and Curtis meet, and was it in politics or something else, and then you guys came together to work in this space?
Yeah, so I mean, we were both politically active in college, but we lived on the 2nd floor of Case Hall at Michigan State because we were both James Madison kids, and we hung out because we both had politically active parents. I mean, obviously everybody knows the speaker. So we hung out from college on. I am the godfather to one of their kids. Curtis was the best man at my wedding. He's my best friend in the world, and it's kind of a unusual world that managed for us both to be friends for, you know, I guess, God, over 20 years now, and then end up in jobs where we have to work with each other.
Yeah.
Or get to work with each other.
Yeah, pretty fun, good opportunity, and then also dangerous.
And it's boring. Bethany can attest, having been on calls, we often reminisce about things that really is just, kind of pure old man boring stuff, like what TV shows we watched in college.
Or they compare their favorite football players.
We may have to have you both come back and do a review of Curtis's music career.
He's a good guitarist. You should see if you can get him to sing on the podcast.
So, well, cool. We'll shift gears a little bit. I'm going to kick it to Ron for kind of the first question, digging into the state budget. Thanks for telling us a little bit about yourself, Dave.
No problem.
Again, thank you guys both for coming on. We know you're really busy with all the budget now. And my question more is, President just signed the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. A lot of money is going to be going to the state, a lot of money to counties and local governments. How best can we, or as the state, manage these funds so to make them work longer than just this year? Is there a way or a plan where that can happen?
So, I guess I'd answer that question two ways. One is, obviously, we're still in the process of studying the bills and the funding streams, because it's more than just the direct aid. I mean, there's money for child care investments, there's money for school investments, there's money to really try to affect transformative change. And I think you framed it the perfect way, which is we have probably a once in a lifetime opportunity to have this funding available to us. At the same time, the federal government is providing tremendous resources directly to our residents. So then the question is, what can state government invest in, and how can state government make investments so when we emerge from the pandemic, we're in a position to thrive? And we're undergoing a process to try to prioritize that. We'll be reaching out to stakeholders, to professionals that work in government space across the state, and try to learn lessons from other states on the best ways to put these funds to use. But really, that has to be the focus. What investments will the federal rules allow us to make that can really transform and make meaningful change to our residents? And that's got to be a focus. And I think along those lines, the pandemic did highlight some of the places where we need to invest, right? We've seen that there wasn't the healthcare infrastructure that we necessarily needed to be ready to respond. That we've seen that there was some disparity of access. And I know people often, when they hear a discussion of disparity of access to healthcare, they think urban areas, but it's a huge issue in urban areas, but it's also an issue in rural areas. And we need to figure out the right investments in infrastructure that can be made either with this funding or other federal funding to try to figure out how to drive resources to people where they need them, so that if something like this comes again, or any kind of emergency, we're prepared to meet it.
Do you see once this one is finished, let's say 2021, the 1.9 has been doled out, Michigan has theirs, you guys have put in place hopefully long-term solutions. Do you see a potential of another one coming around in 2022, given that obviously last will be one time, it can become addictive for some municipalities and some locals and some programs? Do you guys see that as maybe becoming another issue on the back end here?
I think that's why we have to be very careful about how we spend the money. It needs to be driven towards transformational investments that help us meet future need in a way that's sensitive to our operational budgets. I do see, and at least I hope, that there is additional funding from the federal government for infrastructure. I mean, we are getting a tremendous amount of money as our local governments, but the need far outweighs or exceeds the amount of money we're getting in terms of an infrastructure space. And I know it's so hard, and it was hard for me coming even from the city to the state, because you get these numbers that are so big, they're hard to kind of wrap your head around, right? I mean, my God, if you have $5 billion, it seems like you could fix everything. But, an average high school is exceeding $90 to $100 million when you add in ADA compliance and other components that they have to design high schools for today. The total cost of infrastructure in the state is significant, and the amount of investment that's been made over the last several decades has not kept up with the pace of need. And therefore, there's this backlog of projects. And you can see a little bit of that in the fact that, we announced a recommendation to the legislature for $300 million in local bridge repair. That only touched the bottom of the problem of local bridges that are, that were closed. But there's a whole nother set of bridges, literally hundreds, that are in structural disrepair that will end up on a closed list if we don't make investment. So if you think just local bridges, which are the smaller bridges that are across the state, there's at least, another maybe $900 to $1 billion of need just there. And that doesn't touch all of the other local infrastructure, pipes and alike. So Ron, to answer your question, I'm hopeful there's a second piece on the infrastructure side. And then I'm really hopeful and optimistic that we can come together with the legislature to make sure these are transformative. The great thing about the priorities on the other side of the party is, they're always, and they always have been at a state level at least, cognizant of long-term budget obligations and the need to make sure that we're making investments there. So I think working together, we can drive investments that take into account the need to be protective of or protective against building programs that aren't sustainable into the future, without at least an acknowledgement that, this is a 3-year kind of post-pandemic program.
So building off of that a little bit, Dave, you're all of what, I think 10 weeks onto the job now. So I expect you have a real good handle on this. And it goes along with kind of what Ron was saying, but what are what I would consider like 5 or 10 year thoughts of that are going to, or issues or budget implications that are going to shape this town further down the road, and to the degree that the federal money plays into it, if you have thoughts on that, share it, that we could alleviate or use that to smooth or help that runway kind of on a long-term basis.
I think the first thing over the next 5 to 10 years is our tax structure and our general fund budget. Once we get through the period of stimulus, there are structural issues in our budget we have to deal with. So we have to begin to build the plan to deal with those. In a more long-term 5 to 10 year, I think one of the things that will really dominate everybody's thinking is, in a post-pandemic world, the way we do business, the way we interact has shifted. We've dramatically accelerated the cultural acceptance of remote work. We've dramatically accelerated some investment that businesses will make in automation to space people out and to lessen their reliance on employees. And therefore, there will be other types of jobs and other types of places where people will work to participate in the economy. And we're going to need to make investments in our people to help train and upskill them so that they can access this new kind of post-pandemic economy. And more than that, as we make that investment in our people, I think that there's a corresponding economic development that comes with it. Because in my time in the city, and I know the mayor would say this as well, there was not a lot of focus on tax incentives and alike and tax structure. You had to do kind of your best, right? You had to make sure you made the cost neutral somewhere else. But what every CEO was focused on was, how was your workforce, what workforce availability was, and how well were they trained? And that, I think, is going to be a driving factor in our budgets moving forward. How do we change that? I think the other things, with the remote work and alike, and the need to have access to this kind of medium, broadband type investments are going to be important. And then, we have an infrastructure problem. We need to make investments in our roads, in our water systems, in our sewer systems across the board. Probably in electrical grids too, though that's more, private sector driven. And, as we convert to more renewable energy, there's additional needs for investment. So I think those are probably categorically where we're headed. So then with respect to this funding, I think we can make, hopefully, some down payments on that training, some down payments on some of the infrastructure things. Again, we're going to be constrained by the rules that the U.S. Department of Treasury issue and the federal government issues, depending on the program. And from that, we can start to try to chip away at those problems in a meaningful way to set us ahead when, hopefully we get to the other end of this tunnel.
Coming from Detroit, obviously you had basically not 9 city council members, and you're walking into Michigan, you have 148 legislators. Bethany's obviously dealt with these folks before. What do you see as a difference in kind of playing 9 off of each other or 148 off each other?
No, with all due respect to my chair of the House and chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I did get the benefit of going through 3 budget processes with my budget chair in the city. So we had established a working relationship. We understood each other's priorities and each other's processes. So we were able to work together to bridge what were significant divides at times between the mayor and the council, but we were able to kind of set aside all of the different preconceived notions and work a process to get to a result. I had the benefit of having been in the city for years before to develop a relationship with Chairwoman Ayers. And one of the things, I need to work on, and I think we collectively need to work on, is developing those relationships and focusing on the budget and learning how to focus where we agree with each other. It's really easy to focus on the discord. It's really easy to focus on where we disagree. And Chairman Elbert and Chairman Stamas are serious, dedicated public servants. And of course, they're going to not agree with everything I said. If they did, I'd wonder why, right? I mean, that's the natural human experience. The real difficult thing to do and the important thing to do, and the thing we were sent here to do, is to figure out how to set those differences aside, focus on our common ground, and make investments that we know that the people of the state are counting on us to make. And we're still in a work in progress, as I think most people have seen, at getting to that point. I'm ever an optimist, so I'll stay optimistic that we'll get there.
Bethany, I got to ask, what was his first question when he came and sat in his office?
Proverbial office, right? Since we're only in Zoom. That's a good question. I mean, it's been a really fast-paced 3 months. Dave came in, obviously, as we were, 6 weeks out or so from having to put out a budget. So I think he's jumped in and learned the material very quickly, as obviously you've all seen. So it's been good to work with him. I can't even remember what that was, probably other than something about catching him up very quickly. So we've been in a very accelerated 6 months or 3 months, especially when you factor in 2 different sets of federal stimulus bills all at the same time. So
Dave, I mean, we're seeing, I think, the hope, right? We're getting vaccines into people's arms. We're going to have opening of vaccines in early April. It feels like there's some optimism in the air. You all have access to economists and folks who are kind of helping you understand what this future looks like. What do you think? Let's just say Q1 was still kind of all about coming out of what I would call, the dark winter. Q2 is going to chew up a little bit of that, maybe 3 and 4. How are you guys looking at Michigan's recovery? What might be hot and what might be a concern for you guys as to what might get left behind or recover? I think one thing in Michigan, unfortunately, we know recessions, and we've come out of recessions before, but we usually have a pocket of people or an industry that may not always rise with the rest of the boat. So I'll pause there and see if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll answer that question 2 ways. The first is, I think you're right on timing, right? I mean, based on what economists think, I think most economists, especially given what the federal government did, expect kind of an explosive growth. And I think, to some extent, if you think about economics as an indicator of human behavior, I think many of us are going to participate in that. Many of us want to get out and do fun things. Many of us want to go on vacations. We want to celebrate with others. So I think that there'll be that kind of explosion of optimism once we get there. When we get there, I think is obviously an open question that I'm not sure anyone can predict, but I do think we're primed for growth. And I said I would answer that in two parts. The first part is, a bunch of other states are making investments with this federal funding. To my knowledge, Michigan is the only state that I'm aware of that isn't deploying all of its federal funding because we're still working through a process. And we're getting this influx of additional capacity to invest, but we're not the only ones that's getting this influx of additional capacity to invest. In other states that act quickly and make smart investments are going to be well positioned to compete for jobs that may otherwise be here. And the cost to move now has become so much lesser, right? I mean, I'm doing this not in an office, right? I mean, our ability to separate from an actual location and move to a new one is decidedly different. So I think one of my fears for that early set of next quarters and into next year is how well as a state we're able to show the world we can function. The second thing that I think we all have to be worried about is what people call the K-shaped recovery, which is that some people have done actually really well during this pandemic, while others have not. Others have really struggled. And I think that there's a potential for that to continue as we move forward. And that's when I was talking about the need to make investments in our workforce, in our people, so that they have an opportunity to move themselves from that bottom part of the K to the top part of the K so that they can continue to have an opportunity to thrive. I'm not sure where those sectors are. I'm not sure exactly that any of us know how the economy will adjust in a post-pandemic world, but I think we all know the way we consume things, the way we buy things has changed, right? I mean, for those of us that weren't using Amazon as religiously as many of us use it now, that delivery model has shifted a little bit. We're all a little more comfortable and probably a little bit more like the convenience of mail order. So what does that do to a service sector? When you think about hotel industries, I think a lot of us want to go on trips. I mean, everyone wants to kind of get out of the house and see something new. But I think about it from a consultant standpoint. My prior job, we had consultants that would come sit and work across the table with me. Have we figured out that this is enough of that interaction so they're not flying in and staying in a hotel? And then what happens to the hoteling industry as it adjusts to a new set of demands as business travel maybe tamps down? I don't know if that will happen, but I think it's predictable that it might. So I think we have to worry about not only the proprietors and owners of those hotels, but the people who work in that industry. I think that kind of answers your question. I wish we had more certainty, but if the last year has taught us anything, is that, at this point in time, certainty projecting out in a pandemic, it just isn't available to us.
You'd mentioned infrastructure earlier about obviously the need we have with roads, bridges, the grid, and the like. Besides infrastructure, if there was another sector in Michigan that needed an influx, an injection of a kick, what sector do you think that would you would at least look to improving?
And the federal government, I think, is helping us here. I think the first thing I think of it is when we look at the recession and the disproportionate impact on working mothers, you see the importance of childcare, and that industry has been disrupted significantly by the pandemic, and we need to invest there, not only for the small business and proprietors that run those businesses, but people need access to quality childcare options for their kids, and we're going to need to make really targeted investments to ensure that that industry survives and that there are more available places where kids can safely, spend their day while their parents work, so parents have the option to work. And then carrying that on as the kid kind of ages is, schools in general. I think that there's a need. The kids in school went through a lot. I mean, you've got kids that were juniors that, graduated and maybe didn't even spend any time in school, and they're now moving off to college or post high school experience. You've got kids that are undergoing, jumping from 8th grade to being a sophomore in high school, there's a lot of investment and attention that these kids are going to need to kind of work their way through this experience. And I think that the federal government helped us there. I think we're going to have to be very careful about how we make those investments so that it's available to all of our students. I don't know, Bethany, you've been with the state longer than me. Am I missing any other possible investments?
I mean, there's always many options, but I think you've hit some key priorities.
I guess I will close out with just a couple easy questions, maybe give folks a little bit better understanding of who you both are. Are you reading any good books? Do you have time to read? If you did have time to read, what would be a good book you'd want to read? If you have any thoughts on that.
I think Dave's looking for a book.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the title of the book. Rochelle Riley suggested it on Twitter. It's Alice Randall's new book about the history of some individuals that lived in Black Bottom. So I've been reading that book
Cool.
for the last couple of weeks. I don't know, Bethany, what are you reading?
Honestly, last year I tried to read at least a book a week, and this year's been a little bit hard to do that, so I'm behind. But I just finished a book called The Missionaries that was out last year, and I saw on several good lists, or is out recently. So it's about both missionaries and mercenary work in the military, and sort of a comparison between Colombia and Afghanistan. So that's been an interesting difference in some of the other war coverage that you usually read.
Yeah, I bet. All right, last one. How do you drink your coffee?
Just plain coffee, just black.
Also black.
All right, two simple folks with good reading. And both those books are nonfiction.
Mine was actually fiction.
Oh, really?
Mine's a fictionalized nonfiction, I think is how they describe it.
Okay, historical.
Kind of like the Eric Larson books.
Okay, cool. All right, Ron, do you have any other questions for our esteemed guests before we've already held them past?
Nope, just thank you guys. You guys are doing great work. Good luck going forward, and please continue to keep taking our phone calls.
Thanks, Ron and Andy.
Thanks, Al. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for joining A Key to the Inside, the KJL podcast.